let's bow our heads for prayer before we start. Our loving Father in heaven, thank you for Michelle and for Graham and for Mission Serenity. Thank you for the journey that these two people have taken and the ministry that they're now taking right around this nation and probably beyond these shores as well. I just pray as Michelle shares that you'll work through her and open our hearts to hear her story and respond to it. This we pray in thy name. Amen.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Michelle, and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. But I've struggled with the after effects of being sexually, physically, spiritually, and emotionally abused over a long period of time. My journey is a reflection of what can happen to you if a man or men or people in your lives don't act or behave as people should. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. Please don't, because the grace of God has helped me overcome. I want you to take on board this story so we can give hope to others that they too can overcome. I'm a mother of 4 and now 6, joining with Gray. I'm a grandmother of 13, nearly 14. I was adopted into a loving Adventist family as a part Aboriginal baby. And my family loved God and they attended church, and I had a really, in the main, an idyllic childhood in a lovely country setting. My parents were beautiful, my 3 older brothers were beautiful, and I had a younger adopted sister. Unbeknown to me, or my family, or even the church family, I was being groomed from the age of toddlerhood by a perpetrator. And when you see at the end of the talk, there'll be a little montage, and there's a picture of Big Camp taken about 55 years ago. It started then. He groomed on not only me, as I said, my whole family. Sexually molested at age 9 with digital penetration. Although I know for a fact that I was molested before that with inappropriate handling, dealings, behaviour, etc. And that was to break down my boundaries, and that was to break down what I knew to be safe for me and my trust in him, because I didn't know what he was doing, or that what he was doing was wrong. It just became what happened. I was threatened by him when I was digitally penetrated by him not to tell a soul, or I'd be given back to the orphanage that I came from. It shut me up. I couldn't tell my mum and dad. Even though I loved them dearly, I couldn't tell anyone. I learnt at that point, I started to change my identity. I started to put on behaviour patterns that became Shelley, the little girl, which wasn't the real true Michelle, because I was Michelle. I became this little girl who had to hide her emotions a lot, who had to hide with her plain facial expressions. I couldn't talk. I couldn't disclose my fear, my pain, or anything to anybody. Other behaviours I put in place. Now, weak men abuse. Men who have never been validated maybe as a man. In one way or another, sadly, men who have never had their emotional needs met abuse. So do women. My perpetrator had obviously never been validated, as he felt inadequate, obviously, to women his age. And he felt the need to show his power over children, me being one of them. And unfortunately, he had many victims. He obviously felt he never measured up. So where did this come from? Maybe, I believe, back in his childhood, he'd been abused in some way or another, maybe by overbearing parents, controlling parents, criticising parents, his emotional needs weren't met, or he was abused in some other form. I don't know. As I said, I started to put in place many behaviour patterns. I started to run fast, I started to do risk-taking behaviour in that I would ride horses very fast through the bush, especially after being abused. When I couldn't talk to anybody, I started to run in the paddocks, cutting my feet maybe on the ground, on the rocks. I started to ride through the bush so the brushes would hurt me, and that's how I could control the anger and pain in me. I was raped at 11, and this continued every week, and sometimes more than once a week, sometimes lots of times in the week if he could get hold of me, until I was age 15. This happened in Sabbath school. This happened at church meetings. This happened at church socials. This happened anywhere he could get hold of me, and I was from a closed country community where my whole family only associated with church people. I did not know what the world was like. He was trusted in the community. He was financially supportive of the church. He was a charismatic man. He held an ideal place in the church, and he had everyone fooled. My parents too. I was looking forward to 15 when I could get away to boarding school. I would be done with him because I couldn't tell anyone. During the times of these, I was raped in stables because he was a horsey person and I loved horses, had my own pony stud at 12, and that gave him an excuse to get access to me because of that same interest. I was raped in stone rooms. I hate stone rooms. I became claustrophobic. I was shut up, locked up, all sorts of things. I still couldn't tell anyone. He used to have major horse riding events at his place, and one major horse riding event happened and there was many people from the community there, but he abused me badly in the stable. And as I walked back onto the veranda through the people, I was distressed. And someone noticed that I wasn't walking very well. And they said, "Cheryl, you're not walking very well." And I was about possibly to say something, and he said, "That's all right, she's been riding horses all day. Don't worry about it." And I knew then that nobody would believe me. So I didn't say anything. So I go off to boarding school. After 6 months at the boarding school, which I was really looking forward to, I was deemed to have strange behaviour, or behaviour that wasn't really good for a nice Christian girl. That nobody bothered to look at why I might be behaving like that, and we must do that to our kids if they're showing bad behaviours. If they're not being social to other kids, if there's something different about them, if there's a behaviour change or something that you detect that may be wrong, you have to look past the behaviour and find out what the problem is. But I was condemned for something I didn't do and expelled from the college because I wasn't deemed to be a nice Christian girl. My dad said to me on the way home, because he picked me up in the middle of the night, and he said, "Do you want to fight this?" And I said, "No, I don't want anything to do with the church." And I didn't. Because I was 15, I still had my education to do. So I had to go and live with my auntie, who was a non-Adventist, and live in a large metropolitan area and go to a non-Adventist massive big school. Now, because I came from a closed community, basically I had not been exposed to alcohol, tobacco, even arguments. My parents didn't argue, not that I knew anyway. So I was exposed to the world's partying, smoking, drinking, drugs, and I never did those things, but they attracted me. And unfortunately, soon after, or at 15 and a half, I met an older man who I became infatuated with, thinking it was love. My goals in life went out the window for him. He said I didn't need an education, and so I gave it up after a couple of years. He ended up telling me what to wear, who I could talk to, where I could go. He began to control me. I had lost my boundaries very young, remember. I didn't know what was mine. And he just crowded in and took over. I did do hospital-based nursing at that stage, but he didn't encourage it, and I eventually gave in, or stopped working just after I got my certificate. I got pregnant, unfortunately, very early, and he would not marry me. This hurt me. He also had other girlfriends, and then he started to physically abuse me if I didn't obey him. He was also drunk a lot, which made him more abusive. So from one abusive situation into another, which is often the case. I left the church. I tried to take my kids when they were kindergarten age and take them to Sabbath school. I knew in my heart that that's what I should do, but I was deemed to be a bad girl. They could smell the smoke of my ex-partner on me. They didn't want the good girls associating with me who might draw their good girls out of the church. I left the church. I felt judged. I wasn't allowed to associate with my friends, so I lost my identity completely. And after I had 4 children, I'd completely lost sight of the real me. He continued to be physically and emotionally abusive. I trod on eggshells all my life. I didn't know how he would react every time he walked in the door. I would not respond in any way or form till he walked in. I knew what mood he was in. It was that horrible. I was too scared to do anything wrong. I couldn't tell my parents. My parents were naive to what the world was like. We never had TV when I was a kid. We never read magazines when I was a kid. They weren't allowed in our house. I had no idea. My mum wouldn't have understood what a violent man was. In fact, when I did try and tell her that my ex had got cross with me one time and slapped me, she basically said, "You'll have to do better, Shell. What's happened?" As if it was my fault. She didn't mean to. She was just couldn't understand what it was like. I left him many times, but was persuaded to go back for the kids' sake, because my mum said, "You have to go back for the kids." Many years later, my kids said this was the worst thing I ever did to them. One of my daughters today says she still wishes I had taken her advice when she was 11. So I became an enigma. I became non-emotional. I would not let my perpetrator know he was hurting me when he was abusing me. My face didn't display anything. I learnt not to show my emotions. I became a control freak with my kids. I became addicted to busyness, trying to hide my pain. I became an overworker, an overachiever. I had to be perfect at everything else I did because I had no control on that part of my life. I went into being a control freak. I set in place many habits, such as overworking and overachieving. They were my addictive behaviours. That was the addiction I put in place to cover my pain. People go to alcohol, people go to eating, overeating, undereating, cigarettes, drugs, promiscuity, all sorts of things. I put in place these and they were my addictive behaviours. So where did my ex's behaviour come from? I know that he had a very abusive father. He was a sensitive, loving little boy who basically had it bashed out of him. His father said boys cried. Boys don't cry.